Jennifer here with the Parent Coach Club, and I am here with Elena Joy. Hello, Elena.
Hi, Jennifer. So good to be here.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you here. Elena is an inspirational speaker and founder of the Pride and Joy Foundation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, but I really want Elena to tell you her story because it is incredible and super inspirational. So Elena grew up in a very turbulent home. She joined a conservative church as a teenager. She put herself through college. She got married. She birthed 4 beautiful children. And then, Elena, tell us what happened.
That's the cliffhanger, isn't it?
And then.
So I was married and 4 beautiful kids and living in like the neighborhood. You know how every city kind of has that, like the neighborhood where you really want to be if you're like that young, cool mom. So that's where we were, and that was my life. Like literally our neighborhood was surrounded by a white picket fence. So that should tell you everything you need to know. So that's where I was and what I was doing. And my youngest went off to school, and all of a sudden I had 6 hours a day to think for myself. And I realized I was really uncomfortable with that. I didn't recognize a lot of the thoughts that were going on in my head, specifically that I wasn't happy with my life. And that wasn't an acceptable thought for me. Because look at my life. Like I had these amazing, healthy kids, and I had this great husband who supported us very well. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and like I had all these really wonderful things. Who am I to not like my life? Like I felt so ashamed that I wouldn't even accept that as an option, that I could not like my life. Like all I could think of was, okay, first world problems. And since then, I realized that that's something we do a lot, right? Like something traumatic happens to us and we say, well, it's not that bad because my neighbor or my friend or my sister, like that, she has it worse. She experienced this. So I don't get any pity or sympathy or empathy or even get to acknowledge it within myself that it was horrible. So this whole comparison thing kept me locked up for quite a while. And I tried to just really distract myself, picking up all these hobbies, right? And I was trying to really fulfill that role of who I was in the community and in the neighborhood. And so of course I'm going to go join a gym, not just like a gym, but like a religion gym where you like go 6 days a week and they become like family, right? But that left still too many hours in the day. And so I started long distance running, and looking back, I realized I was really just running away from my life. I was just running towards not hearing the thoughts anymore because I didn't want to accept them or integrate them into my life at all. And then there were still too many hours in the day. And so I looked for this really hard, challenging hobby that would take up my entire brain so I wouldn't have to think about anything. And it turned out to be fly fishing, which is just super fun and amazing. But part of what happens in fly fishing is that you're standing in a river. Okay, that in and of itself is amazing, right? So I'm standing in a river in a beautiful place with no people around. And it's very meditative, almost like yoga, because it shuts down all the other tabs in your brain because you have to be so present and focused when you're doing it. And so as I started to do that, I realized it brought such peace and such calming to my life. But it also meant that I couldn't ignore how I was feeling, right? Because when you stay very present, those emotions become even more real and bigger because you're not distracting yourself with everything else, right? And basically what happened was through a bunch of experiences with that, I realized I really don't like being with a man. And I'm actually totally in love with my best friend. And that was really hard, as you can imagine, to accept Because not only like was I in a marriage of 17 years with 4 kids, but I was also in a very conservative religion. And in our area, that religion is the majority of people. We're like 80% that religion here. And in that religion, you cannot be gay and a member of that church. So not only was I looking at walking away from my marriage, I was looking at walking away from all of my friends, my entire faith community, and my God, because I was really taught that you can't return to God if you're acting on these emotions. And so the stakes were high, and I enrolled myself in conversion therapy, which is just a therapy that tries to make you heteronormative again. And I had a lot to lose. So I was willing to do that. But even though I was so willing, I didn't do my homework. I didn't realize that this isn't a therapy that's approved by the APA. You can't be trained in it. Therefore, you can't know if you're good at it. It's never been proven to be effective. Like all of those basic research things I didn't do because I was so desperate to rid myself of this thing that was going to screw up my entire life, right? So eventually I was very, very lucky and I got help. I got real help to not only deal with the anxiety and the depression that was happening before the conversion therapy, but also conversion therapy has a 57% suicide rate with it. And that is where I ended up. And I had no skills to get myself out of that pit because I had always learned that if something's wrong, if something's not right, you must not be praying hard enough. You must not be reading your scriptures enough. You must not be going to the temple enough. Like, these are the things you do to fix your life. And so if something's wrong, just do more of those things. So eventually I got real help that said, no, like, you need real help. You need real medication and you need a real therapist. And you've been subjected to this, and that makes suicidal ideation like a very prominent part of your life. And you need to be really aware of that. And what became the overarching feeling was my kids almost lost their mom. And that's not acceptable to me. That is not acceptable to me. I'm not going to be the one to cause that pain. When I was in the middle of the worst of it, it was like the day that I was going to carry out my plan. Luckily, my very best friend recognized that. And she said to me something that has stuck with me, that changed everything for me. And that really, I now say it everywhere because it did save my life. She said, you think taking your own life is going to take away the pain. And it doesn't. It just spreads it around. And so when I was feeling that pain and then thinking, if I go through with this pain doesn't go away, it gets transferred to my kids. Then it was, no, this is not happening. And I'm going to do everything I can to prevent this from ever happening for myself. And then once I felt really on solid ground with that, which is, right, a whole nother conversation, then it was saying, my eyes were opened to the suicide rate that is present in the LGBT community, especially our young people, especially our youth. And knowing that I was in that same pit and that someone helped me, it became overarching to reach out and to share the story so that I can help others as well. And I come at it from kind of a unique perspective because I did live straight for 37 years. And I'm raising these kids. I am like an in the trenches kind of mom, right? Like, I'm not that weird lesbian down the street who wears Birkenstocks and she has a roommate once in a while. Like, there are certain parts of the population that mainstream parents can't relate to, and therefore they find it harder to learn from. I present as very mainstream. It's just who I am. And I know their life. I know what it's like to carpool to 3 different schools. You know, like I know what it's like to have a whole soccer team in your minivan with Otter Pops dripping everywhere. Like I know that life, and I also happen to be queer. So when you are living that life and you have your kid that you love so much come out to you, I love to be that bridge to help with the communication. So that's what I do.
Wow. There are so many points there that I just want to touch on, because you took us through your journey. Thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely.
And I've heard your story, and I know about the fly fishing. Like I've heard it, but when you tell it, just like we're just friends chatting like this, it has so much impact and really hits home how important the work is that you're doing to be able to reach out, and how your friend could reach out to you and say that and just get you the help that you needed to go on and help so many other people is incredible. But backing up way before that is how you just acknowledge that you were running away from those feelings. And I wonder how many other listeners are doing the same thing. If they're filling, the hours in the day to not have to have these thoughts that they think are wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think more and more it is, when you say normal, mainstream, what's normal and mainstream? Like you're normal and mainstream, and you're, you're with a woman.
Yeah.
That's normal and mainstream. That's okay. But for a lot of people, and especially you were in such a religious community, and you lived a straight life for 37 years, and you were trying so hard to fit into the mold that we're told we're supposed to fit into, yet you became aware by quieting yourself of really who you are. And I can't imagine how difficult that whole journey was to get you to this point. But I just want to acknowledge that I feel the courage that it took and the bravery that it took is going to impact so many other lives. And that's really what you do, is through the Pride and Joy Foundation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You
yes.
help those that are considering the coming out in the LGBTQ community, but you also support the allies that love them.
Absolutely.
Because, it isn't just about the person, it's about everyone else around them. So there's so many points there. There's so much you said, and there's so much, but I know you're here today to really focus in on self-awareness with us. So I want to bring the conversation around to self-awareness. And I know you talk about something called the Mental Boardroom. So I'm wondering if you can just touch on that and explain what the Mental Boardroom is and
Absolutely.
how it helps us become self-aware.
I love that. So I introduced this concept with a story. My girlfriend's name is Kristen, and she has this aunt and uncle that never had kids of their own. And so she was like one of their beloved, right? So she went and did summer vacations with them, and she traveled with them, and she just has so many amazing memories growing up with this aunt and uncle that really just loved on her, right? Well, in that time, she could hear them talking about their feelings on homosexuality. And so when she's in her 30s and realizes that she is the person that they really don't like, well, she feels like she already knows how they're going to respond. And so she just kind of fades away and kind of stops communicating with them as much. And it's like 3 years later, and she and I are living together, and her aunt finally reaches out and says, "What's going on? Like, why are we not communicating anymore?" Which kudos to her aunt for being that up front with it, right? And so Kristen had to explain, like, this is who I am, and this is who I live with, and this is our family, and that's what my life is right now. And her aunt responded in a very typical way. It happens all the time. She said, this is going to take some time. And that's kind of how the conversation ended. It's going to take some time. Okay. And so the phones hang up, and as often as I've heard that, I hadn't ever witnessed someone else hear that, someone that I love. And so I watched how that affected her. And the very visceral reaction that she had in that moment was, what is so horrible about me, whom you have known for 34 years now, that it's now going to take time to adjust to who I am? And my very visceral reaction to that was, it's not her, honey. She has a bigot in her head that she wasn't aware of. And so that started this concept in my mind of, we all have a mental boardroom, okay? So around this table are all the different aspects of us. Like, I have an inner science nerd. I really like empirical evidence. I really like statistics. I really like things that'll prove out. So I have an inner scientist here, right? And then I also have like an accountant, or the person, the bookkeeper, who has to pay all the bills. That person's not very educated, but that person is still at the table and needs to be, right? And then I have the mom. I have the mom of 4 kids. The youngest is 10, the oldest is 18. Like, that mom has an opinion about a lot of things. And then I also have the girlfriend, right? I have all these different parts of myself all sitting around the table. And when I was first exploring this idea, I was using it as a way to make decisions, right? Like, I need to, whatever, I need to make an $800 repair on the car this month. How does everyone feel about that, right? And the mother in me is going to say, yeah, make that repair. That car needs to be as safe as possible for the kids, right? Whereas the accountant in me says, you don't got that kind of money. So when I'm able to let everyone have their say, that's when I feel like I can make a decision that I'm not going to regret in the future, right? But then I took it to, oh, damn. I probably have a bigot sitting at my table, just like her aunt. And I had no idea. And so I started to use self-awareness to figure out who my bigot is. And I define self-awareness as the intentional observation of our thoughts and actions without judgment. And that's really key, right? Because if you go back to what I was saying earlier about how I was so ashamed that I wasn't happy with my life, I felt horrible that I wasn't just fully grateful for my life. There was a judgment. I was layering a judgment on that feeling. I was having the thought of, I don't enjoy my life. I don't like my life. But before I could even accept that thought as truth, I was layering a judgment that said, oh, you're ungrateful. That's ridiculous. You have a great life. You're so blessed, right? And so because of that judgment, I wasn't able to deal with the emotion. And so I come back to self-awareness with the mental boardroom. And I think, okay, I'm going to look for my triggers, and I'm going to be aware of them and observe them without judgment this time. And so it took quite a while, but I was watching a Netflix show and I saw a drag queen. And I was just recognizing, I was observing without judgment, that kind of pissed me off. I'm like, okay. The reason why I'd never recognized that thought before was because I was ashamed of it. I am a lesbian. We are supposed to be on the same team. Why do drag queens bug me? Why do they make me angry? And so once I removed the judgment, i.e. the shame of having that thought, then I was able to explore it a little bit, and I was able to realize, oh, for me, it's a power dynamic. It's a man pretending to be a woman to make a career. And it was about taking away money and taking away power. And men, you already have all the power. Why do you have to pretend to be women to have more? Like, it was that whole scenario that was playing out. And so then I made purposeful, intentional decisions to get to know some drag queens on a personal basis and to revel in their beauty and to find the beauty within me that they inspire, but also to realize not one drag queen from the beginning of time has dressed up as a woman to take power away from women. That's not part of the agenda. And it just took me exploring that to realize it, and then to excuse the bigot from my conference room table. Like, now I see that you're here, and now I can get rid of you. But if I was clouding that chair in shame and just refusing to even look over there, then that bigot's going to stay at the table and going to run the show, right? And so that's kind of how I teach how self-awareness can help us in our parenting, is it helps us realize that there are people sitting at our mental boardroom that shouldn't be in there, but because we're ignoring them, we can't get rid of them. Does that help?
Yes. And wow, aha moment here. Mental boardrooms. What a great way to teach that, and to teach you to become self-aware. You know, especially right now with the Black Lives Matters, how we do have someone at that table, and to be self-aware and to stop and to just think about how and reflect upon, like you said, observe, why is it that we are acting or feeling a certain way? And that is incredible, the creating that mental boardroom and going around and looking at all the people that are around there and how incredibly impactful that can be. So, okay, you had said, and I just want to say this again, your definition of self-awareness is intentional observation of our thoughts and feelings without judgment. Did I get that right?
You got it. Spot on.
Intentional observation of our thoughts and feelings without judgment. That must be something that we have to train to do.
Yes.
Like,
well, it's just a muscle, right? That we work. And so at first it's very weak, and then it gets stronger than we ever imagined.
Mm-hmm. And I think the observation part of it, instead of the ignore, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to push that feeling aside. I'm going to push that thought aside. It's keeping all those people around the boardroom and observing, and then do you then go, you're fired?
Right?
I don't like, you know, you're not on my board anymore. You are now demoted to the mailroom.
That's great. We actually have just recently, because I taught this concept at a conference recently, and there's a guest post on our blog, a man who was in the audience at one of those, and he's really been struggling with internalized homophobia, which is a real issue in our community. And he took a weekend to really explore that person at his mental boardroom who was the homophobe. And he was able to see how it was affecting all these different layers of his life. And then he went into like, you are fired, and this is why. Like, he went through the whole thing with his very good friend, kind of acting as a coach and a guide. And at the end of that weekend, he hauled that internal homophobe right out of his boardroom. And you have to read the writing, the article. It's just so amazing. It's so powerful and can be applied on so many different levels. It's really cool.
And it started with you and your teaching. So bravo to you. Something I wanted to ask you about. So we've got our mental boardroom. Tell me how the outcome of that affects our self-worth, because a lot of times when we're feeling negative thoughts or thoughts that we don't want to acknowledge, we feel selfless. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Especially because I think self-worth really plays into our parenting. There is nothing to make you feel like a crappy person like a teenager saying, you suck.
Yeah. Do you hear my kids behind me? What?
Like, oh my gosh, it's amazing how having children can just really wear on your self-esteem, on your self-worth, on the whole thing. My 12-year-old daughter can put me in an emotional place that no one else in the world can do.
No, what is that?
What is that? So definitely self-worth plays into it. And when I teach this concept, I talk about how, do you know how you have someone in your life? It could be like a sister-in-law or someone that you work with, and you meet them and you're just like, not impressed. Like, you're just not really jiving with that person. But you're kind of forced to spend time together, whether it's with family, at family functions, or whether it's at work, 8 hours a day, you have to be right there next to that person. And you actually start to get to know them and what their life is like and what they like and what they don't like. And the more you get to know them, the more you kind of understand them, you get the context, why they make the decisions that they make. It all starts to make sense, and you actually end up like respecting them, right? And sometimes even loving them because you've gotten to know them really well. Well, what I teach is that you can't love yourself if you don't know yourself. So you can't embrace what you like and what you don't like. You can't be grounded and centered in who you are if you don't know who you are. So getting to know yourself without judgment, because oftentimes we think we know ourselves, but when we're listening to how we know ourselves, it's layered with this inner critic, right? Everything we choose to wear, everything we choose to eat, every action we take as parents, we've got this inner critic saying, that was dumb, that's ugly, now you're going to be fat, right? Like all the things that the inner critic says. We can't get to know ourselves if we're listening to the inner critic, if the inner critic is running the show. So I teach that you're on the path of self-awareness if your love for yourself is increasing. If your love for yourself is decreasing or not increasing, if it's just stagnant, then you're not moving along the path of self-awareness. It's kind of like a really great compass to tell you kind of where you are. So the more we get to know ourselves by removing that layer of judgment, the more we actually love and appreciate who we are. And then when that 12-year-old makes that comment, it doesn't push you off into this space of, I suck as a human being, because you actually know who you are and you like it. And it's pretty great being in that space.
Okay. Tell me step by step. You can't love yourself if you don't know yourself.
Yeah.
Another Elena Joy quote. Love it. Love it. I'm going to be putting that in the comments as well.
Awesome.
And to have no judgment, because when, like you said, your 12-year-old or my 14-year-olds are saying something, I could let it take over my entire day and my mood.
Yes.
And so when I'm self-aware and the love for myself is increasing, when they get in the teenage state, because teens sometimes say things that are not nice, but they don't mean, I know they love us, they don't really mean it. They just know what to say to get us.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. So I'm trying to think about like all the different ways I want to explain this. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
So I have an oldest son. He's 18. And my youngest is a daughter who's 10. Okay. And there was some family drama that came up. He made some choices that weren't ideal. And I freaked out. Like, who I am now is completely different than who I was 5 years ago. And frankly, I'm very different from the woman who raised him because he is my oldest, right? And so all of a sudden I was screaming, I was yelling, the vein in my head was popping out, my heart was pounding, I was sweating, like my body was being very clear that I was triggered. And in that moment, I said some things that I probably shouldn't have said. And then I went home and gave myself some love because I could tell that there was someone at the table that was freaking out. And as almost everyone is who freaks out, they just need an increase of love to calm down a little bit, right? And so for me, what I do for self-love, I really get in my head all the time, and I need to ground. And so I've got to get in my body. And so I have a whole protocol that I go through when I get like really triggered like that. I go for walks. I do some yoga. If I'm still feeling crazy, I do some weightlifting. Like I need these things to get into my body and out of my head that's like thinking all these things. And by doing that, here I am on my walk in my neighborhood, and I have this massive epiphany of when I was a kid. I was like 8 years old, and I had an older brother who's a senior in high school. And some family drama went down. And he had a huge argument with my parents, and he left. And he didn't really come home to the family home ever again, because he had graduated high school, he went on to college, right? And so in my little kid brain, senior in high school, big brother makes a mistake, mom and dad freak out, I lose my big brother. So I was having this massive emotion that my daughter, my youngest, was going to lose her big brother. This had nothing to do with my son. I mean, yeah, he screwed up, but that's his issue, not mine. This had nothing to do with my ex-husband. This was like a me issue. And so once I realized that, then I was able to go to my son and say, this is why I freaked out. This is why I'm so concerned. And he was able to say, I would never do that. I'm never like just going to abandon my family. Like he was able to say all the words that I needed to hear. And he was able to see, oh, this is why mom freaked out. I am not like this delinquent person. I just triggered something in mom that freaked her out. So like, that's like one of my biggest examples of this is who I am now, because I've been able to incorporate self-awareness. And this is what's making me like have such a better relationship with my kids. And hopefully model that behavior for them, so that when he's an adult and he has kids and he feels himself get totally triggered, because he's gonna grow up with baggage from growing up with me. They all do. They all get to fund their own therapy bills, just like I am. And so there he is as an adult. Hopefully he'll be able to see, okay, this is like when my mom got really triggered that one time and it had nothing to do with me. This has nothing to do with my kid. I'm just being really triggered. That's the hope. Fingers crossed. So yes, so when I'm teaching, okay, how do you achieve self-awareness? Like, how do we get to that point? So I teach it in a lot of different ways, because a lot of different people need it from different perspectives, right? And so one of the most accessible ways that I teach it is that you can break it down into subjects and try to just be really self-aware on that one subject. So I suggest starting the first one with nature, because not a lot of us are totally judgmental about nature. And yet, when you start to really watch your thoughts and your actions in regards to nature, I like to tell a story of my stepmom hated wind, hated it, like it made her want to punch someone in the throat, okay? Wind. So they both had these dreams that they want to do, my dad and my stepmom, for when they retire. And my dad's dream, it's his turn to do his dream, and his dream was to live on a sailboat. So they bought the boat and they started living on it, and my stepmom was going insane because you have to have wind if you're going to live on a sailboat. And then one day, a pod of dolphins was swimming with them. And the wind made it possible for them to sail with the dolphins. And that made her whole retirement right there in that moment. That was the crowning, most amazing thing that could happen. And from that moment on, she loved wind. But all I can remember is the days when I was a teenager with her. And if it was a windy day, man, watch out, because Jane was going to rip your head off, right? So it's things like that to recognize, to take a day or a week or a month and just focus on your thoughts and your actions in regards to that one area, nature. And then as you get stronger and more confident and you've exercised that muscle a little bit, you can look at things like money. What are my thoughts and actions around money? Without judgment, right? You can't spend money and then say, oh, you've really screwed up the budget now, you're being an idiot, right? Or you can't layer that judgment on it, or you're not actually dealing with it. You're just reacting to the judgment, right? So there's money, there's your body. That's a huge one. Still working on that one, right? Because that one, self-judgment is all over that one, right? You can look at your relationships with your kids. You can look at your relationships with your partner. It's all about just practicing that muscle of, I am aware that this is what I'm feeling. I am aware that this is what I'm thinking. Period. Stop there. And then I typically really encourage people to free write. Sometimes I say journal, but sometimes that has a really negative connotation for some people. So I'll say free write. I consider anything writing to be beneficial. So it can be an Instagram post, it can be a talk, it can be whatever you want it to be, a poem, I don't care. But when you integrate your body into self-awareness through the writing, things happen, realizations happen, freedom happens. It's a really cool thing. So hopefully that helps as like concrete steps that you can take towards self-awareness.
I don't even think you know how many times I'm going to be listening to this interview again after, because so many things came up for me as you were talking. It was all those limiting beliefs too, like one that just jumps in my head is I always have to be working hard. I was brought up by very hardworking, beautiful, beautiful humans that raised us. They were teachers, gave it all up to raise their 5 daughters in the country and farm. And were very successful, but worked hard. And we were brought up to work hard all the time. And so now when I don't see everyone working hard, I think, what's going on? You like at home, right? I'm working hard. Right. You need to work hard too. And it's, right. I think that I'll start with nature, but I think I'll get to that one. And I'll come back and we'll have a talk about that, because there's so many things that I can observe in my life that the way that you just explain that can really help eliminate the need to have like that anxiety or tension or friction when situations come up. So I love that. And I love your story about the
because often I can imagine often in that situation, like if you walk out of your office where you've just worked forever, right? And all the teenagers are sitting in the living room watching TV, that could be so grating, because the story that's there is, I'm only a good parent if I'm teaching my kids to work hard. They are not showing me that I'm being a good parent. Well, of course, we're going to have an emotional reaction to that idea that we're not a good parent, right? Whereas to them, they're like, I'm just sitting on the couch.
I know. What are you freaking out about? Yeah. Right. I can see how that can really transform relationships too, is when I'm not putting all of everything that I believe onto everyone else, how that can really transform my entire family. And starting with that self-awareness. So I love that you went through so many key points there, and tools. You really gave us tools to think about, that boardroom. And I love the win story because it puts things into perspective too. And, finding the joy in something you don't enjoy often is how I kind of took that story, is those and I'll picture those dolphins. I don't mind wind, but I love dolphins. So I'll remember that story. So, Elena, so I could talk to you forever and ever, but I want to make sure parents know how to connect with you. So I know you have a membership, and you have been so generous to offer a free month in your membership. I cannot believe it. So can you give us what to start with?
Sure.
Like where to lead people. I know you're on our parentcoach.club website, and you can find Elena under Pride and Joy Foundation there. But how else can we find you?
Yeah. So when I started on this journey, as I've communicated, like kind of what our environment is, my kids were really needing community and a feeling of, okay, maybe it's not weird that my mom is with a woman, because the few times that we found other queer families to hang out with, it was just so affirming and they felt so normal. And so I was trying to find more and more of that, and it was really hard because often what happens in cities is that it's kind of downtown, that's kind of the gay district, right? And couples meet and fall in love and get married. And when they want to have kids, they don't stay in downtown because usually the schools are not as great. They move out to the suburbs. And then they're like me, where there's not another gay couple for 10 square miles. And so it was becoming really, really hard to kind of find and build that community where we are. And so I wanted that, as well as I wanted queer kids to feel more normal within their families. Because one of the biggest things I realized is that we have these marginalized populations, and the LGBTQ community is within a marginalized population. But in most other marginalized populations, when you have the Black community, the Native American community, their parents are usually of the same population. And so they get it, right? They know what it's like to grow up as a marginalized population member. They know what it's like to try to navigate adulthood within that scope and range. But when you're dealing with queer kids, their parents oftentimes have no clue. Like the best ones have kind of been raised around it, and so maybe they're a little progressive, but it's hard. There's a real sticking point, and I feel for those queer kids, and I also really feel for those straight parents that are just trying to do the best they can. They love their kid. It was never modeled for them how to be an ally of a queer kid, so how are they supposed to know how to respond to everything? And so I wanted to create a safe space for them to come in and ask questions, as well as see the queer parents like myself who are happy and functional and living really wonderful lives with kids that love them. Like, I feel like that really takes away a lot of the worry and concern that the straight parents have about the future for their kids when they can see that other people are blazing that path and doing very well. And then the third group that I wanted to reach out to were these allies. I was realizing that we have these aunts and uncles and teachers in the classrooms and grandparents who are like, okay, a kid that I love has come out. How do I not hurt them? And how do I make them feel loved? Because I have no idea how to do this. What if I say something wrong? What if I say something hurtful? I don't know what all the letters mean, right? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to create a space for them as well to come in and learn and contribute and feel like that they are helping others and really able to ask the dumb questions without feeling dumb, right? All of those things, I wanted to create that space. So that space is the empowerment community within Pride and Joy. And so that's what your members can receive a free month of exploring that community, bringing up questions, getting answers, giving answers to other people, really enjoying that fellowship and that partnership there. And then once in a while, I have parents who want more help and they have connected well with me. And so we move on to a one-on-one coaching situation. But I have found that the majority of my clients get what they need from the community. And so that's what I try to foster as much as possible.
That is fantastic. And thank you so much for offering that 1 month free to go in and check it out. So the membership is, like, just to remind people, the membership is for families, LGBTQ families, and the allies that support them and love them.
Yes.
So it's really a safe, warm community to connect with others. Thank you so much, Elena. I super appreciate you being here, sharing all your goodness with us. I know I'm going to become more self-aware because of this conversation, and I'm very honored that you were here today. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we go?
I'm feeling like I need to say this, and I hope it's not like trite, but don't let any verbiage kind of hang you up. When I'm talking to different audiences, like I get a vibe from them when it's live, back when we did live events. And I can tell, like, is this an audience where I'm going to use the word mindfulness? Or is this an audience that I'm going to use self-awareness? Or is this an audience where I'm going to use emotional intelligence, right? To me, they're all synonyms. Use whichever one feels right for you, because for some people, mindfulness feels way too woo-woo and they can't connect with it. Whereas for others, emotional intelligence feels way too cerebral and they can't connect with that. So when I have a general audience like this, I use the word self-awareness and I use the word daily writing, but you could use journaling. Like, really know what you like, what resonates with you, and use that vocabulary for you. I feel like that's the only other thing I should say.
That is so amazing. Thank you so much, Elena, for being here. I hope you will come back and share more of your wisdom with us. And
thank you. I would love to. This is fabulous.
And thank you for all the good work that you're doing in the world. It's so important.
Thank you.